Welcome back, Paul Gerard from Price Accounting Services in our series where we're discussing structures, and this episode's about companies. Companies are a legal structure implemented and established under the Corporations Act, which is Commonwealth law. Strangely enough, companies are actually a modern form of structure, and if you watch our series on trust, you'll understand a bit more about that. Companies have certain features which are going to be common to most companies, but we're going to confine ourselves to a discussion about a private company, or what we commonly hear of as a proprietary limited company. The common features are the company will be one which has a name, and so it might be ABC Proprietary Limited. That tells the whole world at large that this is a company established under the Corporations Act, and it is limited liability, and we'll discuss a bit more about that a little bit later. The other issues that a company will have, they're common. It will have officers. Now, we commonly call the officers directors or secretaries. Directors are those people empowered to make decisions and choices for the entity, because the company is its own living, breathing human. In a way, it's capable of being sued or suing. And so it's important to establish it and make sure that the directorship's set up correctly, because if you get your directorship wrong, your directors may be the people who get called into a court or are required to defend the actions of the company. A company must have at least one director, and it can have multiple directors. And we'll often talk about asset protection and structuring, and a lawyer will talk about those sorts of things. And so it's really important that when you're establishing a company, you do give consideration to who the directors will be. First of all, for control, but also for asset protection. There's no point you both, husband and wife, be a director if you both get then dragged into court. There can be some benefits of not doing that, and there can be other benefits of doing it. So each situation may be slightly different. Also, we've got to think about directorships and control. So if we've got two parties, so let's call them partners, and they're arm's length, friends, let's say. You want to be in a situation where one party might exercise and influence control. However, if you've got two directors, it'll be 50-50, and directors' decisions must be made unanimously. So you'll have issues such as, what do you do in the event of a deadlock? So all these things are going to be requiring legal advice at the outset, perhaps even a shareholders agreement. But the parties to the company will stick to that. We'll say, right, who are the secretaries? Well, company doesn't have to have a secretary, but if it does have one, it must have at least one, and it must be a person like a sole director company, person who is ordinarily resident within Australia. You can't set up a company with directors and secretaries who are all offshore, okay? The secretary's job is administrative, and the secretary's role might be confined to administration more than direct management of the company. So there can be some merits in that. A lot of the reasons why we will recommend a company be established with a sole director or multiple directors and at least one secretary is there's a provision in the Corporations Act which governs how a company authorises and demonstrates that its acts and a signature of a director is binding on the company. And in the modern form of corporations law, this particular section of law says that either a sole director may sign a document, and so you'd need to sign it, sole director. Alternatively, two directors. But then there's a third proviso, and this is an important one, which is why we often recommend a secretary. A person who is also a sole director and a director, a sole director and a secretary, can sign alone. So we often encounter the issue of, let's say, an auction or signing a contract. It needs to be signed on the spot. Having that secretary facility may assist that. So that's an important issue. The other key features in a company will be the shareholders. Now, they're the people that own it. So the company issues shares as a means to show proportional ownership. So, for example, if we've got 12 shares and there are 3 directors and three shareholders and they each have 4 shares, then it's easy to determine proportionate ownership. There's also things like rights of share classes that need to be explored, and that's an issue for both tax and legal advice. So that, for example, let's say you have a shareholder class holding one particular group of shares and another group of shareholders for example, husband and wife, each owning different classes of shares, it might be possible to stream a dividend to one or the other or both classes of shares. So that's an important consideration. It can't always be done, but if it's planned from the outset, it might be capable of being done. The other key parties to a company might be the business name registrations. A company can own a business name. So what does that mean? Let's use the example of Coles. Wesfarmers Limited owns Coles. Coles Supermarkets Proprietary Limited, etc., are not only individual entities owned by Wesfarmers, they also own Bunnings and so forth. So they may well be operated as individual companies and Wesfarmers merely as a holding company. So we can have a tree arrangement to ownership of companies, quite complex sometimes, quite simple in other cases. So it's important to get that right from the outset and make it sure that it's established correctly from the outset, because you don't want to be changing shareholders, because it can trigger capital gains tax and all sorts of other considerations, perhaps even legal issues. And that's why we keep referring back to get tax, get legal advice, and don't do it yourself. So I hope that helps explain a little bit about companies, and I look forward to you watching a few more in this series so you can understand a few other structures, and we'll see you then. Cheers.